we needed to, to think about how to effectively engage, with our target audience in a way that's meaningful, in a way that's authentic, and in a way that, is relevant to them.
This is Advertising in Africa with Dele Udugbemi on Africa Business Radio.
Welcome to another episode of Advertising in Africa with me, Dele Udugbemi. Today I have a friend who has become a brother. He's actually become my family with me to talk about the pandemic in Kenya. We want to use Kenya today as an example of the kind of impact the pandemic has had on the advertising industry across Africa. So today we'll be talking about the best person I feel for the job, because in my journey we've met in and out of Kenya so many times, so his perspective is therefore not just about Kenya. So I'd like to welcome the one and only Gil Kemami. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Dele, and very much happy to be part of your podcast. And it is my hope that the exchange, will lead to something interesting, and your listeners, can gain some insight on what's happening in the industry in Kenya specifically.
I believe so. I'm really looking forward to hearing how things have spun up, but it always helps to give a bit of a background. I've done a little intro about you, but the best person that can talk about you is you. So if you would just please give the listeners a bit of your background, just so that we could put what you share with us later into context.
Okay. It has always been difficult for me to actually introduce myself.
I know.
Because most of the time, I don't know where to start or what to say.
Yeah.
But in any way, so as Dele said, my name is Gil Kemami. I'm the current managing director of BBDO Mediaedge in Nairobi, looking after the East African region. Prior to joining BBDO in Kenya, I was the managing director of EXP in Nigeria, which I ran for 2 years, and then I was convinced to return to Nairobi or to Kenya. Prior to that, I worked in Accra in Ghana as the MD of Ogilvy & Mather for 4.5 years. And prior to that, I was running Ogilvy & Mather East Africa out of Kenya for close to 6.5 years. And prior to that, I was part of FCB Africa out of Johannesburg, working across, Africa and servicing different clients. So in a nutshell, I've been in the advertising industry for 18 years plus. I've been blessed and fortunate to have worked across various regions, as I mentioned, from Southern Africa, East Africa, and West Africa. So that's me, originally from Cameroon. And but I see myself more of an African citizen than any or being part of any specific country.
Like I said, the man for the job. So the background you've given, my view, just kind of puts you right, in on the spot as to be the person to talk about this. Let's take before we go Kenya specific, just the pandemic and its impact on the industry. I think it's a very good place to start, where we were all working from home, for what I think is the best part of 2 years now, and yet servicing clients, and remote working all of a sudden has become like a standard and all of that. So could I just take your point of view as to how it's impacted the industry, just before we then go specifically about Kenya?
Yes, to your point, I think, the COVID or the pandemic, took all of us by surprise. And I think for me, the biggest surprise was primarily around ways of working as agencies. I think, for donkey years, we were all used to, having your team around you, the physical kind of engagement. And suddenly, due to the pandemic, we all have to rethink, ways of working. I think for me, the first impact was around how to reorganize oneself in such a way that we still have the comfort and the confidence that, having been forced to work, remotely, we will still be able to effectively deliver against, our clients or customers, requests or expectations. So I think from my perspective, that was the biggest challenge. Having to trust in the people, having to believe that, the commitment, the passion, the drive they had working from a physical location, they will carry the same as the work, from the remote location. Around that also, it was the whole thing about how do we ensure that they are equipped to deliver, on their task. So if you considering our industry, we have a segment of the workforce, we call creative or arts people. So how do we ensure that the machines, they take with them, they will be looking after it, they will have the software they need, they will have access, to clouds they need, and so on and so forth. And as a company, we had to rethink, that whole policy about allowing staff, to take equipment back home. We had to relook at the insurance of those equipments because previously with the insurance company, it was one location, everything, security-wise is put in place. Now I will have Delhi, I will have Gil, in Ikoyi, in Apapa with this, those equipment. How do we ensure that, it is insured? How do we set ourselves up? So I think for me, that was the biggest challenge. The other challenge, I foresee, or the impact that, we had to manage was engagement with client. You will recall Delhi. Our client had always requested for physical meetings and whatnot. And suddenly now it has to be Teams or Zoom. You're missing that human connection, so to speak. And yet, we both have to believe in our ability to make this thing happen. So I think that to me was the first hurdle we had to tackle, at least from a Kenyan perspective, but I think it's a global thing. Secondly, making measures or systems in place, your Google Meet, your Microsoft Teams work, type of solutions, having precise, work schedule, and so on and so forth. Other than that, I think it was also, the other impact was around media consumption. And I think for me, that was the biggest. In the past, we've always talked about, integrated communication solution. We've always talked about being channel, agnostic, in respect of how, we engage clients or customers, but I think COVID forced us to truly, look into that, because suddenly you have your client, all sitting at home. They become truly multi-screeners, be it the laptop, be it the telly, being, the iPad or the phone. So how do we ensure that at any given point in time, you are able, to connect and to engage with those customers, which led to the traditional channels, seemingly becoming not that relevant anymore. So how do we ensure that we still showcase the relevance of traditional channels in the mix of COVID, and how do we ensure that, we today fully understand, the online channels and how best to leverage those channels. So in a nutshell, that's what I would say, for me, has been the impact of COVID at the beginning, and it's something that, over time we've learned and we're still learning, to manage as we go.
Yeah, as it's turned out, its impact in different markets have been different, where obviously Europe was hit, starting with Italy, Spain and so on. The US was hit badly, and they have terrible news in terms of number of deaths and so on. And yet Africa, didn't have that impact. We don't know if we've dodged a bullet, or if, as in the case of the new variant, if it is a bit of a work in progress. So we don't know if we are at the tail of it, or just that the wave has not impacted Africa. So our numbers are not terrible, thankfully, at least compared to the rest of the world. But how is Kenya specifically, first in terms of the impact on business, because business automatically then affects advertising, and then now you've given us the adjustment working remotely as it's required, which I think, to your point, is global, so I think it would also be true about you. But my interest is more the volume of business. How, we went through mostly lockdowns last year, not as much lockdown this year, but still there were restrictions. So the economy has not been fully opened in any place I know in Africa over the last 2 years or so. But I wanted to know the Kenya-specific situation and the learnings we can all take from there.
Well, thanks for that. Well, I think in Kenya, the approach the government took from the onset was to be very cautious in a deliberate way in order to somehow, mitigate the full impact of, contamination and therefore, the death toll and so on and so forth. So from the onset, Kenya went into complete lockdown. And by complete lockdown, I'm looking at it from having the lockdown at 7 p.m., which was moved, to 9 p.m. and then moved to 11 p.m. Okay? So with that lockdown came a lot of, restrictions in terms of people's movement. You had all your HoReCa, being completely closed for, when the lockdown started. And so you can imagine, the impact for clients who are in brewery sector, for example, that limits the consumption, volume, and therefore will impact naturally, your business because, you're no longer able to push, the same type of volume. So we could not, at the time, really do much. And I'm talking in respect of my client not being able to do much because, we all had to be respecting the lockdown. Kenya, a month ago, up in the country, in the sense that lockdown has been lifted, so there's no more curfew or done to whatever curfew it is. So now the economy is fully open. We've seen a lot of sectors picking up in the last 2 months, all sectors at least, because during COVID, the sector that seemed to not have been fully impacted, was the financial sector for obvious reasons.
Okay.
Other sectors, were definitely impacted, but more and more that is changing. In respect of business, in 2020, there was an impact, but it wasn't that significant in our business, in the sense that, yes, we did not close on target, but we closed not shy away, from the target.
Okay.
2021, however, I think this year we felt the full impact of COVID.
Okay.
In the sense that, our client got into 2021 with a lot of, budget cuts, with a lot of, let's wait and see, because nobody could predict, what would transpire. So 2021 has been an interesting year. 2021 has seen us letting go of so many people than we did in 2020 in the midst of the pandemic. But at least the positive side of things is the economy is picking up, so there's a lot of jobs available. Again, we are busy recruiting for next year. Though we're getting into a presidential election next year in Kenya, and at times, like most African countries, the whole country seems to go on a go slow when there's presidential election.
Yeah.
But overall, I think, we're resilient by nature as Africans. We're resilient by nature as African businesses. We do not give up. We are always positively charged and driven. And I think, that's what, sees us being able to navigate through the current difficulty that, we saw in 2021. The reason I'm speaking this past is because we're in December and we're all looking forward, to close the financial year.
Yeah.
And we hope that 2020, will be a most progressive year. In the midst of, having Omicron, as a new variant, I think generally, we are a bit, again, I'm going to say this very carefully, we're a bit fed up of the restrictions, the lockdowns and things. We would like to move on. We're moving on not in a careless way, moving on, being mindful of the measures that one needs to adopt to limit, the spread of the infection. But yet, we would like to stand up and carry on with the journey.
So pretty much like a living with the disease is the option that we have, rather than, I think there have been this attempt to create a herd immunity, which would, like the way it happened with Ebola, will mean you manage the disease to zero. But this is a disease that keeps having flares variants, different things at different times. So what maybe you are dealing with in January is not what you're dealing with in December, but it's still the disease you're still managing. So it would seem like finding how to accommodate it, that is to have life in spite of the disease, looks like the more reasonable option. To learn to live with it, to develop those protocols, to learn to first protect with the vaccination and hopefully at some point a medication, but also to then take it to the next level, which is like, okay, now that you have a level of protection, go back to life. I don't know if there can be a life called normal again. I'm not quite sure I know what normal will mean, because there is just a lot that's happened over those 2 years that you can't stop that either. There is remote working in our life now. There is, you and I are having this podcast despite distance between us, and usually we would have thought to have it if we were in the studio together. And, things have changed. So there are certain positives that we've taken from that I don't think can possibly change right back immediately. So just would take a while. So we then take into the next question, which is about the output. That is, our work process has changed. It was dictated by a public health emergency. We've worked apart from each other when we're more used to working with each other. But in your view, what's the output? What's the quality of work this last 2 years has brought? Has it, for example, brought more creativity? Has it impacted us where, because we're not working together, the quality of work has dropped? What's been your assessment of the quality of work that's gone out there?
Thanks for that. I think, again, quality of work is very subjective. So I want to approach it in a very generalistic type of way. In a nutshell, I think the quality has improved. And I think the reason the quality has improved is because, our back was put against the wall. We needed to think differently. We needed to, to think about how to effectively engage, with our target audience in a way that's meaningful, in a way that's authentic, and in a way that, is relevant to them. I think the one thing that was taken away has been us, always thinking we control the narrative. But I think with the pandemic, it has become clear that, as brands, as agency, we do not necessarily control the narrative. And therefore, we should come up with content, which will allow, that target market to be part of or to, to engage with. So I think the quality, has improved greatly. Even though we're working physically apart, I think we're still working together through, the solutions we have in terms of video conference and everything else. I think it has made us, more accountable as individuals, because gone are the days where by seeing Dele in the office, I'm thinking Dele is working effectively or being productive. Dele now, sitting in the comfort of his lounge or his home office, has become more mindful of him having to be productive. The pandemic has gotten us to realize or to be able to notice those who are not productive, or to notice, that creative output or strategic output or content, direction, which, fail, to deliver on the type of impact we'll be looking at. So overall, personally, I'm kind of positively charged, with what I've been seeing in this market. Okay. Guys are questioning the quality, the creative standard, we've had in the past. Guys are more curious around, what to do differently. We've come to accept that, things in life can change overnight. And as such, the onus is upon us to ensure that, we stay relevant by having executions and content, which are relevant to the audience, and more so because they control the narrative. The amplification of the social media channels, has taken us aback. We've always talked about, social media before, but during the pandemic, it has become even more relevant. Yeah. The influencer type of, persona type of the influencer role became greater than it used to be in the past. We've come to learn that, influencers can actually become content creators, and therefore, quote unquote, maybe make agencies somewhat relevant. because now brand can choose to deal with Dele as an influencer or Gil as an influencer, and Gil will be in a position, to deliver a communication solution which, are impactful or delivers to that brand kind of objective. So I think all those things put together, forced us, and still forcing us, to look at things differently. And I'm one of those people who believe that in years to come, we will have even more better and greater type of quality of work, coming from Kenya and from the region as well.
Great. Like I said, I thought you were the best person for this, and we could talk about this for 1 hour, for 10 years if we chose. But unfortunately, this is the time we have for podcast today. I'd like to thank you, Gil, for your perspective. It's always good to hear it. The number of years you've spent across the continent has certainly put you in a position where you could share that perspective quite naturally, like we were having a conversation over tea in Nairobi, which I wish we have. But thank you so much for your time. If listeners want to follow a lot more about you, they could reach you on LinkedIn. Could you provide the details?
Yes, Gil.Kemami.
All right, thanks, Gil. And mine is Dele Odugbemi. It's just the way to search for me. So, Gil, we shall continue this conversation offline for sure. I am so grateful for your time. It's been a wonderful perspective. And good luck in Kenya. Hopefully the pandemic gets to go away and we get to actually share some time together soon.
Thank you, Dele, and thank you for having me. Like you said, we definitely continue the conversation.
Great. Thanks for your time, Gil. I appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.